Welcome you to WebQuests and WebWalks, weaving the World Wide Web into student learning. See if you can say that fast. You know, at least one time I had to stop and go slow myself. I want to thank you for spending this hour with me because I know there are a million other things that you could be doing and probably a million other papers you should be grading. But I am very, very happy to have you here with me. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Antoinette Brim. And I teach English in the Humanities department, okay? And I'm going to see if I can, yay, I think I can do this. There we go. So, now there's so much talk about student engagement and so much talk about making sure that we keep the students excited and all of that type of thing. So why am I interested in using the World Wide Web when we start to talk about student engagement and student learning and all of that? And I found this really nifty article called "If Your Kids Are Awake, They're Probably Online." And notice the fairly recent date, but some of the things that really freaked me out are the fact that kids 8 to 18 are spending about 7.5 hours a day with their devices. And I don't know where they're, having time to brush their teeth and have dinner or all the other things that they need to do. But then that number becomes compounded when we start talking about multitasking, like listening to music and then doing other things like surfing the internet, which actually takes that number up to about 11 hours of media content per day. And that's a whole lot of media content. So when we start thinking about this, we say, well, my God, if they have all of this amount of audio visual stimulus, constantly the changing colors, the lights, the music, all of that, and then we bring them into a classroom and we want them to sit fairly attentively and look at some antiquated thing called a book, it can become problematic, as it was for this young man. I love that picture. Yeah, it looks like all of our son. So this is what I say, let's teach them with their own toys. Everybody just about has a smartphone, has access to the internet. Even when students don't have their own iPads, iPhones, Androids, this, that, and the other thing, they find ways to actually play with the World Wide Web. So I say, why don't we use it for good and not evil? So this leads me to the whole notion of my WebQuests and WebWalks. So what I want to do is I want to begin with what is a WebQuest. Now I want to give credit where credit's due. About 7 years ago I went to a conference, a WebCT conference, and I went to a wonderful talk with two very brilliant women who were talking about pedagogical approaches to distance learning. And I learned so much at that particular event that I went back home 2 weeks before classes began. I actually reconfigured all of my online classes and all of my web-enhanced classes as well. So you can tell that it really made a big, big difference to me. But what made the most difference to me was probably something that was kind of thrown off the cuff. One of the presenters said, yeah, you know what, you can do something called a WebQuest. And that's just when you ask them a question and they have to go find it. It's kind of like a scavenger hunt. And she said, or you can do a WebWalk, which is when you just send them somewhere. And that little off-the-cuff thing got me thinking and turned into me playing with this notion over 7 years and devising all kinds of strategies to play with it. And I've had pretty good success. So a WebQuest is actually a question that is posed to students, a web question. So students have to find the answer using a credible source from the World Wide Web. So it is kind of like a scavenger hunt, but the cool thing about this is that they can do it with whatever device that they have. They can pull their cell phones out. They can get on their iPads. Most of them have their laptops in their backpacks. So it's something that they can kind of do on the fly. Now, when they find the answer, then they're going to summarize or paraphrase the answer, and they're going to use whatever citation format your discipline requires. So that means that this is good for any type of discipline. In my discipline, fine arts and humanities, we use MLA. If you're, speech or whatever, and you're using APA, that's fine. If you're using Chicago style, that's fine. Whatever you're teaching in your class can be used when you're doing this type of an exercise. So I'm going to give you an example. This is an actual question that I use in my in my African American literature class. Okay? We talk about the slave narratives as a genre, and then I give them this little question and send them out on their merry way. What was the Federal Writers Project? How did it help to preserve the historical record of slavery in this nation? Okay, that's what they get. Now, I'm going to walk you through as if I were a student. First, I have to find the little button. There we go. So they're going to go to any search engine they want to, and this makes it practical as well. They can go to Google or Dogpile. There is actually a search engine called Dogpile. They can go to any search engine they want, and they just try to find the answer. Now, this is where we get a little crafty when we're kind of teaching them things. They, of course, know in MLA that there are credible and not so credible sources. So now what they have to do is they have to ascertain what's credible and what's not credible. So they look and we see Wikipedia, which we all know is a big no-no, and so immediately they say, that's not credible. So they start looking, and some of these are more credible than others. There is one that's a .gov. They know that that could probably be good. And they also know that down here is a .edu, and that's the one we would most like them to click on, and they would know that.
Antoinette, would you go over that before?
Yes, we would go over that before. And it would take them to this website, which is super, super cool, right? It tells them all about the Federal Writers Project. It's got pictures, it's got date lines, it's got all kinds of fun things that they can click on. But they would notice when they got here and found out what the Federal Writers Project was, the second part of that question has to do with slavery and the historical record. So what they would do is they would just scroll down, and at the bottom, can you find it? Can you find it? Ah, born in slavery. Slave narratives from the Federal Writers Project. Dun, 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 and they would know that I've hit something. So when they click on that, this is what they will find. An actual explanation of how the WPA actually compiled 2,300 first-person accounts of slavery and 500 black and white photographs of former slaves. So now they physically have all of the information they need to answer the question. But we also know that you're kind of curious, right? And you're already here, so what are they going to do? Chances are they're going to click on, they might read a little bit here, just because it's there in front of them. And then they probably will start, and I know this because I've assigned this before, they start clicking on these, and once you start listening to these, accounts, and once you start looking at the pictures, you kind of get trapped in it, and then, uh-oh, they're accidentally learning something. Okay, so, with every assignment you have, you must have some type of assessment. So now that the student has found the answer, he or she summarizes or paraphrases. That's something else that we always have to teach, right? We teach this in MLA, we teach this in just about, most of the lower level structures of English, and because, again, I use MLA, they must use MLA, and they also have to do the proper works cited entry. So usually their answer, I tell them, should be about 3 paragraphs, but I always say 3 paragraphs, though a more thorough answer may be more. And then that kind of makes them think, well, 3 is really a minimum, so maybe I better pump it up for this crazy lady. And then at the end, they have their works cited entry. So you can see this has a lot of applications. This is just one way to use the WebQuest. Now, some suggestions when using a WebQuest. Choose a question that will somehow enhance or supplement classroom learning. Of course, that's pretty much a given. But what I find is that it's a good way to spark curiosity and to cover material that perhaps you don't have enough time in class to cover. Choose a question that is fairly easily answered using public sites on the web. Okay, you want to make sure that you don't choose a question that would require them to look into databases and all of that kind of stuff, because that's an extra step. And the whole notion of this is that it's fun, quick, and easy. And hopefully they'll get trapped up in the process and kind of play around with the very credible website. Word your question using strong keywords. For example, in my question, I used Federal Writers Project and I used slavery. If you just Google those words alone, you can't miss it, okay? And this ensures that the search is easier for the student, because you know what happens if you have a failure at first and it's too hard. But if you do it, and you get it immediately, then that encourages the student. And of course, it ensures that you're going to get the answer that you want. If I want to talk about a specific thing like a slave genre, I need to make sure that I lead them to the slave genres. Okay, so good time to use one when you're preparing students for assigned reading. Sometimes you want to just make sure that they kind of come prepared, so to speak. And I find that students will play around with the WebQuest even before they actually do the assigned reading, because this to them is kind of fun and easy, and I don't really care if they do it, in groups. Each person has to hand in their own thing. I actually had a student who told me at the dinner table that her 9-year-old said, because in my I did an African American studies class at my former college, and I did one WebQuest every week that kind of prefaced that week. And so they knew every Monday when they came in, they were going to get one. And she said that her 9-year-old said at the dinner table, "Mommy, what's our WebQuest for this week?" And that just totally tickled me, because I said, "Oh, you do these with your family?" And she said, "Oh, yeah, we do them together." And I thought that was kind of cool. That made me happy. Of course, to frame future class discussion, reinforce proper citation practices. We know that we get better when we practice. Not that we just practice, but that, perfect practice makes perfect. We always want to promote critical thinking, right? And there is some critical thinking involved in this. And demonstrate relevance of the subject matter. Sometimes if you can correlate the subject matter to something that's new and exciting and relevant that's happening right now, they'll say, "Oh my gosh, this really does matter or mean something." And we want to foster curiosity, because if students are curious, then most likely you'll have their attention for a while. So now we're going to move on to a WebWalk. Now, at the end, we'll have time for questions, but if I'm going too fast, just kind of let me know, okay? So a WebWalk is a virtual walk you direct your students to take on their own. It is done by creating a map for your students to follow. Your map may be as simple or as annotated as you like. So when I first, when she said a WebWalk is something where you send someone to, I thought, well, how do you get somewhere? You get somewhere with a map. Well, I did a map the way I would like to follow it. I have no sense of direction, okay? And once I learned one way to get there, that's always the way I go. I don't care if it's flooded. It's like, okay, well, get out the canoe, because this is the only way I know how to go. So I tried to make the map as easy to follow as possible. Now, this is an example of a very simple map. Next class session, we will continue our discussion of ekphrasis. And if they don't remember what it is, there's the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition of ekphrasis. And is this one of those? Okay, good. I was wondering if it was going to come right up, or if it was as slow as sometimes computers want to be. So this is something we would have already talked about in class, but what I find is that if you kind of remind them in one central location, then you don't lose them. They go like, yeah, let me dig out my notes. What did she say? But if I put it in one central location, then they don't get lost. And of course, it's a literary description or a commentary of a visual work of art. Okay. We will discuss William Carlos Williams' poem, Landscape with the Fall of Icarus. Before you come to class, view the painting that was inspired Williams. And this, of course, is the landscape of the Fall of Icarus. So you come up here, and this may or may not be in their book. There's the poem. I always use credible websites. You know, I always want to make sure that I model, quote unquote, good behavior where the internet is concerned. And then, of course, there it is. There is the landscape with the fall of Icarus.
Antoinette, are you emailing them this?
I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, where this best works.
Okay.
Because whereas a WebQuest you can give on an assignment sheet, a WebWalk best works with a platform, and I'm going to talk about why. But see, there you go, and there's the painting. One-stop shopping. So in this little teeny tiny map, they have everything they need to know. They have, of course, exactly what the heck is ekphrasis, and then they have the poem itself. And then they also have the painting. Now, it's easily found, but there's all kinds of goodies all around it. So if you wanted to know more about the painter, if you wanted to know more about William Carlos Williams, all that stuff surrounding where I've sent them is also there for them to play with. And just maybe they'll play with it and accidentally learn something else. Now this is this is what I would call an annotated map. And this is one that I actually use in my African American literature class. And sometimes I will actually do this with them in class. This one we did together. I flashed it on the screen much like what I'm doing with you. And we did it together in class. And in my online class, it appeared similar to this. So in preparation for our discussion of Claude McKay's The Lynching, okay, the poem The Lynching, and there's the poem, because even if it's in their book, I want to make sure that they have it right there at their little fingertips, and they can, minimize it, pull it back up, do whatever they want to do. Okay, so we're going to be discussing this. Take the following journey with me. First, we will visit a place that is without sanctuary. After you view the movie, so I'm letting them know that there's a movie that needs to be viewed, you will better understand the pain in Billie Holiday's voice when she sings Strange Fruit. Now take a breath, write a one-page FreeRide about how you feel about what you've experienced on our walk, and we'll talk on Thursday. So this is in preparation for a class discussion. So what they'll do is they'll go, now this might take a second to load. It's a much bigger file. Ah, that was fast, okay? And then they know, what did I say? After you view the movie, so you make sure that you make all of your instructions very explicit. And then they'll sit and they'll actually watch the movie. Maybe I won't make you wait through that. How many of you have seen this, Without Sanctuary? Okay, Femi, this is an amazing piece. If you're teaching African American Lit, if you're teaching the time period, this is remarkable. You can't hear the sound, I didn't turn the sound up, but basically what you're hearing is the narration of the person who's actually collected all of these lynching postcards. And they're actual postcards that people used to send the same way that we send postcards, except the picture on the front were actual pictures from actual lynchings, okay? So it's very, very startling, which is why I tell them later on, okay, now take a breath. Because I know that this is going to be very difficult and very painful. Now, one of the nice things about doing this on their own time is that they can stop it. And I always tell them, now look, some of the stuff that you're going to see in this particular walk is going to be a little bit graphic. I never just let them walk into anything without them knowing. So yeah, it's quite brutal. It's quite brutal. And then after that, I send them, of course, to YouTube, which is a repository of, you know, just amazing, amazing information and footage. And unfortunately, I didn't turn on the tube, didn't turn on the volume, but, and She Sings Strange Fruit. Of course, you know, I think a lot of you are familiar with that song and just how incredibly painful and mournful that song is. And this is some really great footage of her. She is just really pouring herself into this, and it's a time when she herself looks gaunt. And so subsequently, they are really impacted by what they see. Thank you very much, Jeff. And so what we end up with, that's a powerful little walk, isn't it? It's a powerful little walk. And that's why I tell them, you know, hey, come on now, take a breath. Just kind of sit with it. I have them do the one-page FreeRide, and I don't collect it or anything, but I want them to be able to pour themselves out in that little space of time so that when we meet again for class discussion, they're ready to talk to me about it. And they'll walk into the class talking about it, you know, or I often find that they've been talking about it amongst themselves before we even get to class. Now, this is the last one I'm going to show you. It's a more linear walk, okay? And I said you could make these as complicated or as easy as you want to. This one, when I taught world literature, I used some things similar to this. We have spent the last few weeks reading literature from the Romantic period. View the following works of art. What aspects of these paintings are reminiscent of the works we read? And oftentimes I would have someone from the art department come in and talk about the Romantic period from their perspective. So they can kind of see how all of these periods, you know, kind of infiltrate all parts of art, not just the literature we're studying, but also the visual art. Sometimes I'd grab the theater. Whoever had a free period during that time, I'd say, come talk to my class. But they might get something like this. And these are all Romantic artists and paintings. And they could just kind of sit with them and they would look at some of the aspects of the Romantic period and maybe choose one or two and just kind of think about them. And then of course we have links. You know, once they get in here and they start playing around, they might actually find themselves there for a period of time. Now this is when I really do wish we had audio, because it's very, very beautiful, you know, very, very dynamic music. And then it's just a tour of Europe through its art of that particular period. It came on.
It was buffering.
Oh, okay. That's what it was. You hear it? And so it's a little tour of Europe through its art. Now, yes, you do have to do a little bit of research, and you have to sit and watch a bunch of bad stuff and evaluate a lot of websites and that type of thing, but I find it fun. Now, what I liked about this one is that this individual actually tells you exactly who is on here. And so if they were interested in maybe finding out a little bit more about an individual, they might actually do that. So consider taking your students on a little web walk when you want to prepare the students again for classroom discussion. And I think we really saw that with the lynching video and Billie Holiday singing. Maximize limited classroom time. I would love to show them, you know, a 6-minute clip, followed by another 5-minute clip, followed by another 3-minute clip, followed by, but you know, you don't always have time to do that. But if you tell them this is homework, they seem to be okay with it because it's not dry, it's interesting, it's exciting, and so they don't think of it as bad kind of homework. And it adds color, sound, and visceral experience to the subject matter. I could stand around and talk about lynching all day, but you watch the Allen video and it's like a sock to the gut, you know? And that's kind of helpful when you're trying to engage students. Make homework varied and unexpected. We all like variety. Well, a lot of people like variety. You know, I've got some kids at home who like to eat the same thing all the time, but most of us like variety. Add a little life to your online classes. That's one of the things that always concerns me about online classes, that if you're not careful, they can tend to be very, very sterile. You know, and so one of the ways that you can actually add life to the class is to actually send them outside of the Blackboard's shell or format. Of course, we're trying to promote that critical thinking. It's all about critical thinking all the time. Now, if we spark curiosity, we can also promote lifelong learning, because when they start playing around in these very credible websites, they find things that spark the curiosity, things that they want to write about. I've had students say, yeah, I really like your paper topics, but while I was at XYZ, I saw this, and can I write about that? And then of course that totally makes me happy, because that's what I was trying to do all along. I always act surprised. Oh, really? Wow, yeah, of course. Well, how are we going to frame that? Yeah, it's part of my plan to take over the world. So when assigning a WebWalk, and this is where we go back to, it's best to use a platform, which goes back to your question, Carl. I.e. Blackboard, Facebook. I know of a professor who's using Facebook in his class. Google Sites. When we were at the Hartford Heritage and we got exposed to the Google Sites, I got so excited because you can animate and you could make a really cool map using a Google site, which is what I have put on my list of things to do over the Christmas break. You know, that list we always do that gets really cramped. It's like, the day after Christmas, I'm going to play with this, you know, because I think it'd be a wonderful platform to make some really cool WebWalk maps. Handouts with web addresses are problematic. I've never even tried doing that, because usually you go someplace and they, like a conference or something, and they give you this packet and it's got the web addresses, and then you're sitting there typing them in and one character off and you're someplace crazy. And so I knew just from personal experiences never to try to give an actual paper map. I always use some type of platform. And of course, no students left behind. Did you get that? Yeah, map. Okay, yeah, bad joke, bad joke. Okay, if there are articles to be read during the walk, be sure that the reading is manageable. Okay, because they're not going to read a big, long article where they have to keep scrolling down and scrolling down and scrolling down. One of the things about online learning is we learn to chunk, to put things in little chunks, and then to have some type of reprieve or respite from all of that writing, and then do another chunk. It's the exact same things when you are designing a WebWalk and taking your students for a ride. Destination websites must be easy to navigate, okay? You notice that when I went to a site that it was very, very easy to find the information that you were looking for. All it necessitated was a click. okay? You don't want them to have to take more than one click, or they're going to be like lost, and that goes back up here to no students left behind, okay? We want to make sure that they can find their way easily. Be sure that the student understands why they're going on the walk with you. Notice I preface things, you know, we've been talking about this, so let's take a look at this. Or we're going to be doing this, so now let's take a look at that. They always need to know that it's relevant, that you're not wasting their time. And they need to know what to do at each stop. After you viewed the movie, then XYZ, okay? And these are just some other helpful hints that I came up with when you're just doing any of these types of things. Be creative, but don't create a monster. Keep your WebQuests and WebWalks concise. Because sometimes we get super excited and we're like, oh, and I'll take them there, and then we'll go here, and we'll, you know. And it always reminds me of the little kids you see at Walmart, and the mom's walking along and the kids being like dragged and they're tired and they start whining and all of that kind of stuff. Keep it concise and manageable. Less is more. WebQuests can be used weekly or at the beginning of new units. You know, you don't always want to do one every other day. It becomes too much. They do take a little bit of time, and if they know they're not getting another one for a long period of time, they tend to savor the material longer. Okay? So at the beginning of new units, to introduce units, it's really good too, because it becomes like a little opener. When using them throughout a semester, I find it's best to create patterns. Every Monday we're getting a WebQuest, and then they kind of know to look for it and to expect it and all of that type of thing. Or now we're about to go into a new unit, okay? So it becomes a natural marker or demarcation. Space out WebWalks because they're just a little bit more time intensive, depending upon which type of map you use. And students get tired of too much walking. They really do, you know. So you have to keep them engaged at each destination site, and you can't do too many of them. Now it's a little sneaky, but do keep track of credible websites your students find. You can use them later. The World Wide Web is full of really cool destination sites. And whenever I do a WebQuest, I always test it out. I test out my keywords. I will drop the whole question in or portions of the question to see what comes up to make sure that it's manageable. I always kind of do that. But you know what? You might choose one .edu, someone else chooses another .edu, then someone finds something else, you know, and they're going to all these different sites that, you know, are educational, you know, sites and that are good. And sometimes you're thinking, well, let me check out some of these sites and kind of see what's out there. And they can become destination sites for your WebWalks. And now this is funny. Find questions for your WebQuests in interesting places, like trivia calendars and games. I had a game, it was Black History Trivia. And I went through and, because you want your questions not to be questions that everybody readily knows, but that will be a little kind of epiphany to them or something. And so you want your facts to be fairly obscure, but not so obscure that they can't be found. And so I found all kinds of very interesting questions. Calendars, games, books that list facts. That's another good place to find good questions. And of course documentaries, because they're always telling you some crazy interesting information. And oftentimes, I just watched one this weekend called Misrepresentation. Did anybody see that? I'm a documentary buff. If there's a documentary on, you know, and I have 2 seconds, I'm going to either save it, that's what I'm going to do with those 2 seconds, or if I have longer, I'm going to watch it. And what was very interesting about this, it was how women are handled in the media. And they one of the things that they said about the way the media handles women is that it tends to diminish their credentials. Instead of, and that one of the examples they gave was calling Secretary of State Clinton Mrs. Clinton, which kind of, doesn't speak to her place or her position. So what they did with each one of these experts that they had talking, they had their credentials up there and their latest publications on the screen while they were talking. And so I taped it because some of them had written some very interesting and engaging books and had done some really cool studies. And so I was thinking, I think I'm gonna go back and check out some of these sources. Now, chances are what will probably happen is at some point in time, I will have excerpts or studies or some kind of question derived from some of the stuff that I have read. So it's one of those things, constantly be on the lookout for things that are interesting. I did a Marge Piercy poem called Barbie Doll in a class. You're familiar with it, the girl starts out and she's normal and she's healthy. By the end of the poem, she's had all kinds of surgery and she's in a casket. But you can go look up the poem for yourself. But the WebQuest that precedes that, I asked them a simple question. If Barbie were a real person, what would her dimensions be? And there are two major studies on that, one from Yale, and I can't remember where the other one is from. And I actually found the answer on the University of Texas website. And what I remember about the answer, and the students totally freak out when they see this, and they're so engaged and ready to talk about the poem the next day, is that Barbie would not be able to stand up. She would have to walk on all fours because her back would not be able to support all of this that they have her, carrying around. And that because of the ratio of body fat to her height, she would be 6 feet tall, which I don't think is a bad thing since I'm 6 feet tall myself. But because she's so slim, she would never menstruate. So Barbie would be crawling around on all fours, not menstruating. And so that leads into a discussion of if the way we see ourselves as women and the way media portrays us is even at all attainable. And then we start to look at this poem, which talks about a young woman who tries to make herself Barbie-like. So, just find stuff, crazy stuff anywhere at all, and have fun with it because you want them to be engaged, but hey, we want to be engaged too. And part of the joy of teaching is planning. I love to plan because I think, if they're going to like this, or I wonder how this is going to work, or I'm constantly changing my classes from semester to semester just to keep everything fresh and exciting. So, I have been talking nonstop, which is one of my favorite things to do. And I want to know if you have any questions. Yes?
Okay, you called on me before I actually had my hand up.
I saw it, I could feel it. It's the teacher in me.
My question is, how do you make these assignments plagiarism proof?
You know what, that's a really good question. One, the fact is that they are providing the actual citation material. So I can always go back and I can always look. And if they're in an online forum, which I tend to collect all of my assignments through Blackboard, save the trees and never lose an assignment, it's as easy as a click or two for me to compare their answer with the site that I have seen. So I don't really have a problem with that. And of course, if they're going to make a direct quote, as long as I've got a signal phrase, a parenthetical, and then the works cited citation, that's not problematic. But they know they must summarize and they must paraphrase, and they know that I will check, and they know it's as easy as a click away. And so I really don't have problems with plagiarism on the WebQuests. Yeah, because it's just too easy to check. It's just way too easy to check. And of course, you don't get any credit if it's not properly cited. So you have to cite it. So, yeah. That's a great question because, you know, we're always concerned about plagiarism. But also reinforcing proper citation practices, even in a little assignment like this, goes a long way to helping them become comfortable with citing everything that's not their own. Yeah.
I found sometimes they're not comfortable summarizing.
You know,
So they might actually go and find out what somebody else wrote, capture that, copy it, paste it, and then give you the links or whatever of
something else.
One.
You know, that would really, that would take a couple extra steps. I mean, you'd have to really, really want to plagiarize to give me the edu from one or the website from one and then find another credible site and take that information. You know, I think part of finding plagiarism is intuitive. Even if we're not using something like turnitin.com or whatever the situation is, if you know that the level of syntax is much higher than what that student has given to you in the past, or just sounds a little too clinical, I just Google it. I'll take some keywords and Google it. If it pops up, you've plagiarized and I'm done. But you know, it's all about, you know, using your teacherly intuition. Yes?
Antoinette, on the, one of the blocks, the one with, without sanctuary, you said you asked them to do a FreeRide and then we'll talk on Thursday. So is it FreeRide just for their own?
It would be just for their own use. I use that sometimes in class too. They will have read something and I'll ask them a question. And my higher level literature classes are very familiar with this. I'll ask them a question that maybe on the surface doesn't seem directly related. And then they write about it and then I tie it together. So that way they've already processed, written, and thought in that FreeRide for a couple of minutes, and they bring what they've written to the classroom discussion. In a situation like this, they would just come in and they would just be ready to talk because they've digested it. Now, if I want to do a spot check, I might walk up and down the aisle and tell everybody to put their FreeRide on the table, you know, and so for accountability or whatever. But this is just to get them thinking and to get them processing so that when they come to class, they are ready to have a serious dialogue and they're ready to really look at that poem and they're ready to talk about the line. Like there's this amazing line at the end about the children playing under the swinging corpse, you know, and they have a visual because they've seen the Allen piece. And I say to them, you know, usually what troubles you most about that line? And they'll tell me, you know, that this ensures the next generation of racists and lynchers, and we start talking about those notions. So all of this is really an impetus towards discussion. And you bring up another good point in that the WebWalks often are not necessarily connected to an assessment as much as they are preparation, research. Later on, they'll have an opportunity to write about one of these pieces or to juxtapose a couple of these pieces, and invariably they'll go back to some of these sites and they'll use them, which is okay because I've already vetted them and they're credible. Yes?
Generational differences, are most of your students younger and more comfortable with the technology? And also, do you have, has there been any, I guess not, any problems of access? Our students are not.
These are great questions. I've been using these for approximately 7.5 years, and I've done them on all levels. I've done them with students who are on the graduate level. I've done them in community college settings, and at my former college, we had a very, very high level of non-traditionals. Okay, so I have not had any problems with students. yeah, they kind of really take to it very, very easily. Usually by the time that, I don't do WebQuests in like 101, the first time you would get a WebQuest from me would be maybe 102 and above. And by that time, they're kind of comfortable with playing around with the computer. Sometimes you might have a student at 101 who hasn't, used a computer a whole lot or whatever, but by the time they get to 102, they're pretty adept. And I don't have any problem with that. And when it comes to access, if a student says I don't have internet at home, I just say, well, the computer lab is here, here, and here, and there, and there. And the reason I say that is because technology is going to follow them. Wherever they go, there's going to be a modicum of technology, and they're going to have to get used to it. When they go into the workplace, I don't know of any workplace where there isn't a computer. I was talking to some nurses in Little Rock, and they were saying that even their notes and everything is computerized. And so the more time that they spend dealing with electronics and technology, the better off they are. And I'm going to tell you what it also does. It makes me up my technology. I am not ashamed to admit it. My first understanding of PowerPoint, my 9-year-old daughter who was in 4th grade taught me how to use PowerPoint. And that's the honest to goodness truth. And they take all this stuff in school. The kid can build websites, she can make movies, she can do all kinds of stuff. And I call my kids. I go on YouTube. It's amazing what you can find on YouTube. How to do this, how to make a screenshot, how to, introduce media into I do that. I go to workshops. I ask questions. And then I think that kind of makes me a better teacher, a better instructor. Because sometimes students will say, hey, that's a pretty cool PowerPoint, and I've got to do one for XYZ. How do you do that? And I'm like, let me show you how to put a hyperlink in. Then I feel cool for like 2.2 seconds. So yeah, I don't think there's any barrier to age or to access. Questions? Well, let me ask you a question. How do you think you might be able to use this in your classroom? Yes.
What I was struck with, and I think this would probably be, when you talk about the benefits, is the best benefit is that it promotes lifelong learning. That I think so many of our students have, those of us who are, myself excluded, older teachers, who make references to things that they know nothing about. There's a lot of, they have a lot of holes. And this is a great way, once they do this, to say, okay, I can easily access information and get some background knowledge to fill in.
Right, and it teaches them how to vet the websites, that they're not going to Sally Sue's, website, and she's only in the 5th grade, and then getting some type of information that they know, wait a second, I know how to vet a website, and I can know whether or not this is good, incredible information for me, or whether it's not. Thank you.
I think I might use it for, it's specifically a class I'm teaching next semester where it's a short story class, and it's a hybrid course, and they spend a lot of time online, writing their answers to things and that sort of thing. But I don't end up with a lot of time to really talk about the authors themselves, or the period in which they wrote, or anything like that, because we have so much to do with the actual stories, which is where I want to focus my time in class anyway.
Right.
But to how to get some of that into it, so they have a little more context from the writers. And I think maybe doing a WebWalk for each writer before they start that book would help them to start finding those things, and then I can refer to those in class and ask them questions in class.
That would be so much fun, because you can tell them give some biographical information, but there are also sites that show the houses where they lived, the places where they walked, the maps. There's even a website of famous literary achievers' grave sites. I mean, you can just take them everywhere, and then they can see their tomb or their web, you know, a picture of their headstone or whatever, and just kind of make them more personal, make them more real to that particular individual. Yes.
What I'm hearing you say that really connects to me is like it gives you a way to put more of the burden of learning and thinking and beginning the project before. So even if they've read the play or the short story, it introduces it in a different and deeper way when we're talking about setting, all sorts of things you
Yes.
do. This morning in class, I read with students Toni Morrison's Recitative.
Yes.
And it mentioned
I love
Jimi
that.
Hendrix. And that was very key, that you'd know who Jimmy was. It never would occur to me. They had known. Now, for they didn't have a clue, except for one student. If I thought about that earlier, of course, I would have been prepared, I was thinking then, with a little YouTube clip of Hendrix. But now, what I'm listening to, I'm thinking, for next time, I'll have them do a whole background check for all the towns that are mentioned, the whole setting, the whole cultural,
Yeah.
the whole cultural setting and background, so that I don't have to do all that work for them in class.
I did a Hayden poem that mentioned a bunch of very popular singers and musicians of that particular time, and how they were being held up as these amazing icons, but would the future ever know them? And of course, my students don't know, you know, anybody from the Harlem Renaissance area or whatever. So I actually YouTubed all of these little people in the poem and had them go and listen to each one of the musical pieces before we came and started talking about what was amazing about the music of that time. What is Hayden lamenting when he says all of this is going to go away? How has music changed? And it really helped them to connect with the poem that seems kind of dated and antiquated. I think Linda had, and then Karl.
I was just going to say, I think this stimulates a lot of dialogue, and I would be interested perhaps in using it to have them keep a journal of their own about these things, and then comment on journal postings of other students.
Now that would be interesting. That would be interesting.
Because that
Helps them to process.
them to, you know, look at the lens of their classmates as well as they look at the same material, and sort of, it was, I think, stimulate a lot of dialogue.
I think anything that gets us talking about things that are worth talking about, I think is good. It's good. Karl and then Alexa.
Do you have any sense if students are doing this individually or together or groups sometimes?
I find it depends on the classroom. Most times students are doing these independently, or they're doing the WebQuests with their families. But sometimes you get a class where they've done a lot of group work together, and then you tend to see them huddled around a computer together. And I actually like that. I don't have any problem with them taking the walk together or doing the research together, but each person, of course, is accountable to, if there is an assessment which is attached to the WebQuest, to do their own assessment. But I love it when they take the walks together. I see them sometimes, you know, in the cafeteria or whatever, huddled around a computer, or even at the back of the class after class is let out, you know, clicking on things. I think that's awesome. I mean, they're going to be together talking about the latest rap song. Why can't they be talking about, you know, the Renaissance or whatever you happen to be doing? So yeah, I think it's awesome. It builds community. Yes.
I just wanted to say this presentation reminded me of an article that I had read over the summer about future classrooms, and it was saying that a lot of administrators in the K through 12 setting are considering revising their policy on cellular devices in the classroom, because they're seeing that the students having access to the internet is actually can enhance the learning.
You know, that's
And so
interesting.
it's a very controversial issue, and the movement is called BYOD, Bring Your Own Device.
Get out, for real?
Yes, but that's coming out of the common.
But it's something that probably won't come into effect for decades. classroom can really enhance student learning.
Femi, I want you to talk about the CON program, but I do want to say about phones in the classroom. I have this rule, unless I tell you to take it out, you're supposed to be put away. But if we come to a word and someone says, I don't know what that means, and I'll say, what? You haven't looked it up when you were doing the reading? I'll just step back and I'll say, take out your phones. Somebody tell me what it is. And then everybody whips out their iPhones, and then it's a race to get the, who gets it first.
There's a purpose for it.
Yeah.
It might have a place.
And so they'll say or talk about it or whatever, and then I'll say, okay, phones away. But they kind of like that. It breaks up the class, and I think it also makes them look at their device a little bit differently. You said that idea comes out of a particular program?
Does everybody know about Karl?
No.
Enlighten us.
Actually, you can do that right now on the web. The Karl is actually Solomon Kahn.
No.
Trained at MIT, was an investment banker, and left that alone because he tried to encourage his cousin, visited him in California, to select MIT as a school. The mother said she won't get to do that. She's not good at math. Math and science, no good. She's not doing well. So he decided he would tutor her, and that he would do it using the internet because they lived in Atlanta and he lived in California. And it turned out that she shared that with her friends and family, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, the bottom line is that he ended up with a non-profit organization, which Bill Gates has given $6 million to, and various other people have given. It's a free institute, math and science, and they're now moving across, he's moved everywhere because he's on the internet. And you can plug this in.
Well, maybe we need to put some humanities in that too, you know? Math and science is important, but come on now.
Humanities and political science, a whole slew of other subject areas.
Okay, Femi, you need to get on that.
And so in California, specifically where in California, I'm not sure, but one of the school districts is doing exactly what we just talked about, which is that they've hired him to train their teachers, their elementary school teachers, in the use of technology in the classroom.
That's pretty awesome.
And it is awesome. And so the teachers recognize, just as we were talking here, that we're really facilitators of the learning process.
Right.
You know, because, back to Plato, okay, because the students are taking responsibility for their own learning.
Exactly.
And that they're going on the learning journey because we're showing them how to find the information, how to use the information, and
incredible information. And I find that they end up teaching us a lot of things too, and we have to be open. I'm going to have to say that we've been having such a wonderful party. It is now officially 1 minute past 2:30, and so we're going to wrap it all up. But thank you.